And there is some good news. Investigative journalism is still alive and well. In a few minutes, we'll bring you to the talk we had earlier with Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe. A little bit later, Victory News contributor John Graves is going to join us. First, let's go to Mike Garofalo with today's top stories. Mike.
Since the beginning of the Biden administration, many questionable decisions have been made. Now, mostly through executive action. Now, one of those was something akin to a direct gut punch to America's energy industry and energy independence. On Capitol Hill on Tuesday, the Senate Energy and Natural Resource Committee held a hearing to examine energy development on federal lands, in particular focusing on the Interior Department's onshore oil and gas leasing program. Here is Wyoming Senator John Barrasso.
Wyoming and the Rocky Mountain West is under attack. One of President Biden's first actions was to ban new oil and gas leasing on federal lands. Make no mistake, this is not a pause or a review. This is a ban, and currently there is no end in sight. So why did the president take this action? His administration is intent on ending oil and gas leasing on federal lands. How do we know that? Well, President Biden picked a Secretary of Interior that was on record opposing oil and gas production on federal lands. Since her confirmation, she has said that federal oil and gas leasing is, quote, fundamentally broken. I completely disagree with her. Oil and gas production on federal lands is subject to some of the most stringent regulations in the world.
Barrasso went on to point out what the energy industry has done for American families in a number of states, including those in the Rocky Mountain West. Now, in order to understand what is at stake here in respect to the possibility of removing federal lands from the energy equation, in 2019, oil and gas leasing and production on federal lands reportedly generated about $4.2 billion. And one of the bits of misinformation Senator Barrasso said he wanted to clarify was this. Some Biden administration officials have said federal lands account for 25% of the nation's greenhouse gas emissions. The senator from Wyoming said that number is actually less than 1%. Well, President Joe Biden signed an executive order Tuesday to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour for federal contractors, providing a pay bump to hundreds of thousands of workers.
Today, President Biden is issuing an executive order requiring federal contractors to pay a $15 minimum wage to hundreds of thousands of their employees. These workers are critical to the functioning of federal government, from cleaning professionals and maintenance workers to nursing assistants who care for the nation's veterans to cafeteria and other food service workers who ensure we all have healthy and nutritious food to eat, to laborers who build and repair federal infrastructure.
Studies indicate there are an estimated 5 million contract workers in the federal government. It is not clear how many currently make less than $15 an hour. The minimum wage increase won't go into effect until January of 2022. Greg, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I want to bring in Victory News contributor John Graves. John, there's so many things to unpack right there. The president just did another executive order for federal employees with the minimum wage. That's 95 right now, a count of 95 executive orders in less than 100 days. So he's averaging about one per day. The very first one he did was the Keystone Pipeline, and now we're seeing the ramifications of that down the line in states like Wyoming and New Mexico. Your thought?
Well, I'm glad you pointed out it's almost one a day. Remember, one of the other ones was the Mexico City policy, where we are now funding with U.S. taxpayer dollars abortions to stop the life of the unborn globally, which statistically is 30 to 40% more abortions. So that was on day one of this administration. And so those kind of things are what I agree with you. There's so many things to hit on. You don't know which one to hit on, but possibly the most disturbing was the first one Mike covered, where tonight in the joint session, he's going to lay out how we're going to basically educate and fund everybody all the way down to preschool. And he also yesterday released the critical race theory. So now that means their indoctrination is going to start early for socialism, Marxism, and those kind of things all the way through grade school.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Tonight he's going to do this speech. It's late. Usually we have a State of the Union from a president. That didn't happen. Of course, it's because of COVID, but we're not having it. We're having this tonight. The room seats over 1,000 people. They were asking for 200 to be in there, 100 Republicans and 100 Democrats. Is this more theater for the COVID
Of course it is, and it's not just theater; it's punishment to their political enemies. And honestly, it's going to keep the sound way down if somebody's going to object to it in a joint session of Congress, which is narrowly split 50-50 in the Senate and only a 5 or 6 seat majority in the House. There's going to be a lot of people that are upset. They're trying to keep those people out. That's part of what I think the strategy is.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think that margin is going to get even more narrow based on the census, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Thank you, John. Tim?
Hey, John, I want to ask you real quick, in regards to the number of people that will be there tonight, if you're a Republican, are you more happy to be one of those that are sitting inside that chamber or one that gets to sit at home?
Is that a trick question? I think a lot of us would rather just be there and to have our voice heard, not be silenced or deplatformed or de-invited to something like should be for the whole nation to hear. Yeah. And that's part of the theme that goes through this, Tim.
All right. Well, a new judge who was appointed by a Democrat governor has allowed, for now, the 2020 election audit to continue in Maricopa County, Arizona. Democrats had been seeking judicial relief to halt the audit, but so far, newly assigned Judge Daniel Martin says he will allow it to move forward. The Democrats are claiming contractors hired by the Arizona Senate were not properly securing ballots and equipment. The audit of more than 2 million ballots began on April 23rd. The original judge had to recuse himself after Democrats hired a former extern of his. And a new poll found that a large majority of Americans support states requiring a valid voter ID in order to be allowed to vote. According to the Western Journal, the Fox News poll discovered that 77% of those surveyed support requiring a valid photo ID in order to prove those wanting to vote are actually American citizens. Political party-wise, the Journal says 95% of Republicans, 76% of independent voters, and 60% of Democrats agreed with the voter ID requirement. Greg?
I want to bring John Graves back in here. We ought to agree with it because we use IDs every single day. When we go to the bank or anywhere else, people ask for an ID. Going back to the climate thing and the energy, solar panels, you got to remember this, are made largely in China. And that's what this administration's asking for. And they want us to drive electric cars, but you plug that car in for electricity, which comes largely from a coal-powered plant that makes the electricity for your house. John?
And I want to add two things, that and the voter ID. The energy issue, remember that every president for decades has promised energy independence, so we're not dependent on the Middle East. Only one actually delivered that. It was the last president, President Trump. And that's what people don't want to talk about. The federal lands doing it, just like private lands, it's a stewardship issue. We don't want to destroy the environment. We don't want to worship it. We talked about that last week on the show. The voter ID thing, I would just say this. People need to pay attention and continue your prayers focused on Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, and any other state that is doing that the truth would be that would come out, because people are trying to suppress that at all expenses and trickery.
And the good news is it's moving forward. So that's really good news. Thank you very much. Mike?
Greg, an early morning wake-up call for former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Numerous media outlets are reporting that federal investigators executed a search warrant this morning around 6 a.m. at Giuliani's apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. 7 agents, we're told, spent about 2 hours there seizing electronic devices, including cell phones. The search warrant appears to be connected to an investigation into whether Giuliani violated the law by lobbying the Trump administration on the behalf of Ukraine. Now, according to Fox News, both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York have refused to comment on what happened this morning so far. Well, after hearing this next story, it will be tough to argue with the notion that the First Amendment and free speech in these United States is under direct assault. Now, according to the Federalist, a new report from government watchdog Judicial Watch has unveiled some disturbing findings involving big tech. Now, it found that big tech worked directly with Democrats in California to censor social media posts about the 2020 election. The report goes on to say, according to documents obtained by Judicial Watch, the California Secretary of State reportedly leveraged the state's relationship with communications firm SKDK, which Judicial Watch lists Biden for president as their top client of 2020. Now, to get videos and other social media posts the state deemed misinformation removed or flagged. And let's take a look at how successful the California Democrats were when it came to social media posts that they didn't like. The Federalist says of the 31 requests for removal, Silicon Valley giants such as Twitter, Facebook, and Google own YouTube either nixed or flagged 24 out of 31. Well, Project Veritas is on a roll. The organization's mission is in part to investigate and expose corruption and dishonesty. You probably haven't heard much about it, but last month, Project Veritas won a defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. And the organization has now been permanently banned from Twitter, and it recently announced it is suing both Twitter as well as CNN. Here's a look at a reporter for Project Veritas attempting to call out CNN anchor Ana Cabrera. Take a look.
I'm a journalist with Project Veritas. On February 11th, you tweeted that Project Veritas was suspended from Twitter for reporting other people's private information. Yet on February 14th, you went on air and claimed Veritas was suspended for spreading misinformation.
And of course, social media plays such a huge role here. We're starting to see companies crack down to try to stop the spread of misinformation and to hold some people who are spreading it accountable. Brian, for example, Twitter has suspended the account of Project Veritas, a conservative activist organization. At least that's how they couch themselves.
Why did you broadcast something you knew was false?
Of course, a big bombshell report recently released by James O'Keefe and friends was getting a CNN producer to admit on a hidden camera that the media giant was out during the 2020 election to do what it could to make sure that Donald Trump was not reelected. Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe was a guest on Victory News this morning.
Brand us as conservative or as activists, but Veritas does the purest form of journalism because it's people in their own words. And that CNN official was caught in his own words calling the network propaganda, his words. And I was removed from Twitter for quoting him and relaying to the public what he told me. So we're suing CNN now in federal court in Georgia. We've also sued Twitter in New York State court, and we've sued the New York Times for defamation in New York, and we won a historic victory, landmark order in that case against the New York Times. We're fighting back.
What's the answer to overcoming this corporate blacklisting that happens and silencing of free speech?
Well, I think the answer is twofold. Number one, we have to start suing these people for defamation. And we have to start using the libel laws. You cannot lie about someone with a reckless disregard for the truth, also known as actual malice. It's unlawful to use actual malice, and most people don't have the money or the will or the courage to sue. And I do sue, and I win. We win at Project Veritas. So we have to have hundreds of people suing for defamation. And number two, I think people need to stop being so afraid of losing their Twitter accounts. I think that's akin to saying I worry about what the New York Times thinks about me. Particularly these so-called conservatives or Republicans, they basically need to learn how to have a spine and just stand up for, I guess, what you believe in. If you don't believe in it, then don't say it. So I think people need to band together and just tell the truth and not worry so much about losing your account. If the content is king, it'll get out there and spread.
Well, more and more states are doing all they can to protect the unborn. The latest measure was signed into law by Arizona Governor Doug Ducey on Tuesday. According to the Epic Times, it seeks to protect unborn children with genetic abnormalities who are subject to selective abortions. The law makes it a crime for abortionists to perform an abortion knowing that the procedure was sought solely because of genetics. The one exception is in the case of a medical emergency, but that's not all. In addition, Senate Bill 1457 prohibits public colleges and universities from performing an abortion. It also forbids mail delivery of abortion-inducing medication and allows the father or maternal grandparents of unborn children who were aborted due to genetic abnormality to sue on behalf of the unborn children. Well, this next story, if it were April 1st, then you might want to chalk this one up to April Fool's Day, but that's not the case. According to media reports, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, will be teaching a class this fall at Tulane University. And get this, the subject, you're not going to believe it, fake news. You can't make this stuff up. Now, Hunter is a Yale-educated lawyer, so obviously the guy has some smarts. But according to a real clear investigation, literally all of the jobs on Hunter Biden's resume can be traced back to his dad's donors, lobbyists, and allies. According to the Gateway Pundit, the other part of Hunter's resume includes crawling around on the floor, rummaging for crack, getting kicked out of the Navy for cocaine use, and making homemade porn. The Tulane University 10-week course is said to be titled Media Polarization and Public Policy Impacts. It will reportedly discuss the political polarization in the news media. Let's bring in John Graves now. John, you are a contributor to this network and this broadcast. What can you contribute to that story?
You know, it's stunning, actually, and I would remind people that the epidemic that we have in this country is not just fake news. It was the number one thing, even among faith voters, that they want to stop is this fake news. But it's also silencing half of the news or the real news, like the James O'Keefe story, or what they did with Hunter Biden's laptop. They hid it. 14% of Democrats who voted for Joe Biden said if they would have known about that laptop, they would not have voted for him, and he would not be the president right now. So the media knows, going back to the big tech story, that they can hide the vote, they can hide the information, they can spin the information, and it changes the elections in a way that's fraudulent.
Okay, I want to go back to that. First of all, Project Veritas, if you've never heard of it, go to the website, check them out. Veritas is the Latin word for truth, so it's Project Truth. John Graves, this is something you know a little bit about, the impact of media with what you do at Million Voices. So when you say that, you have some expertise and some understanding. Explain.
It's actually my background. I own some technology companies and we do a lot of digital work, so it's something I'm intimately familiar with. There was a story a couple years ago by one of the executives at Google that said they could take an undecided voter and just by controlling the search engine results and algorithms, they could change that undecided person's vote or selection by 86% accuracy. In other words, we all assume when we Google something, which is a monopoly right now, it's like 86% of all searches, we assume the most relevant things pop up at the top. They don't. Google can make what they want to pop up at the top, and the things that they want to suppress, which is usually faith-based information, be in there, but 100 or 200 down on the search engine.
Okay, real
and so
quick.
that's how they do it.
Real quick, you are an attorney. This should shake us a little bit, what happened to Rudy Giuliani this morning.
To me, it's like Germany pre-World War II. It's what Hitler did to threaten people, intimidate people. It's a Gestapo-style intimidation tactic, what it is. Anybody who helped this president, anybody who was fighting for voter integrity, anybody who's out there, it was meant to send a chilling message to anybody who's fighting for the truth. And we need all to have the backbone that you just saw with James O'Keefe and have courage to do the right thing no matter what the results are.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Thank you for that clarity. I want to touch one thing here very quickly. The assault that happened on the Chinese man, the one that we just had. You had some thoughts on that as well.
You know, it's terrible to me what's happening, and yet what no one wants to report. If you look at every one of these stories, it's an attack on Asians. It's attack on anybody is terrible. It doesn't matter what the race is. But almost every single one of those attacks, the overwhelming majority of them, if not all of them, have been by African Americans, and you won't hear that in any of the stories that they're talked about because it doesn't fit the narrative that it's all white people are supremacist, oppressors, racist against all people of color. And so they use this and spin this. So pay attention to the language. It started in Genesis. They attacked Jesus with it. We, as believers, as Christ followers, we need to pay attention to language and what's not being told and what's being told untruthfully.
Absolutely stellar point. You're absolutely right. Mike, back to you.
Greg, do you have the coronavirus? The alarming question, followed by days of waiting for test results, is no longer the case. You can simply go to your local pharmacy and buy an at-home test and have your results in 15 minutes. Several at-home COVID tests have hit retail pharmacies. No prescription is required. There's no need to mail a kit to any lab, and you can get fast results without having to deal with a provider. Shoppers can buy the Binex Now kit online at CVS, Walgreens, and Walmart for $23.99 plus shipping. The tests are being shipped to retail stores this week. Binex test is easy to use. It contains 3 items, a card, a dropper, and a swab. And it's simple as swabbing the sides of each nostril, then waiting 15 minutes for the results to appear on the test card window. According to Binex, the test is 95% accurate. Each pack contains 2 tests, allowing for a second test after 36 hours to confirm your results. Travel restrictions are changing for Americans who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19. If you're looking for a way to get away this summer and you've had your double dose of vaccines or the one from Johnson & Johnson, you can now add Europe to your list of destinations. The European Commission says the U.S. is administering European Medicine Agency approved vaccines and that the travel to the European Union would be possible. Before that happens, the Commission is working to make sure travelers can corroborate vaccination with documentation that is compatible with its proposed digital green certificate. The Commission is working with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security on a compatible system that can recognize fully vaccinated Americans. Vaccinated travelers must abide by a CDC order issuing in January requiring a negative coronavirus test to board international flights to the United States. The State Department said last week that they are increasing the alert level for a significant number of countries due to rising coronavirus case counts, and that it strongly recommends that U.S. citizens reconsider all travel abroad. Well, young people in West Virginia may soon receive a $100 savings bond from the state if they get the COVID-19 vaccine. West Virginia Governor Jim Justice said earlier this week that they are using the bonds as a way to motivate people ages 16 to 35 to get vaccinated. The governor told BBC News that kids today probably don't realize how important they are in shutting this thing down. West Virginia has been one of the top states in the country for vaccinations, but the vaccine rollout has slowed in recent weeks, which has led to this new measure. BBC News reported that currently in West Virginia, about 52% of the 1.5 million eligible residents have received at least one dose of the vaccine, and close to 40% might be hesitant about getting it. Greg, back to you.
Thank you, Mike. John Graves, I'll bring you in here. You're going to pay young people to get it. The travel restriction for coronavirus, they said, the administration says there won't be any injection passport, vaccination passport, but they would allow their proxies to do it. So the companies could do it. I was really concerned when I heard corroborate vaccinations with documentation and a proposed digital green certificate. That's a vaccine passport.
Yeah,
am I wrong?
That's exactly what no, you're exactly right. That's what this is, and sometimes it's a vaccinated passport by definition, and sometimes it's by indirect definition, where they let other companies, like in our state, the mask mandate is lifted, but still there's all these corporations that are still controlling it. And so that's part of the issue, Greg.
That's exactly what they'll do. We didn't do it, but Costco decided, for an example, or somebody decided that you still have to show that you've been vaccinated, or to go to school or play in sports. That's a little more frightening to me, that big business would be with big government.
Yeah, and think about what you just said. Look at all the stories today. There's big government, there's big tech, there's big media, and they're all trying to do propaganda, do indoctrination, or silence anyone who doesn't fit their side of the story. We've talked about this over and over. They want to silence anybody who disagrees with them. And what we need, the answer to that, is thousands of James O'Keefe. We, as the body of Christ, need to wake up. We need to stand up, and we need to not be the one that bows down to the false gods, but refuses to do that, no matter what the consequences are.
And you're exactly right. You're talking about a Daniel moment, where everybody else around him was kneeling, and Daniel stood with his arms folded like this. And it's time for you to be the one to do that very thing. Excellent job.
That's right. And it's not even just standing. It's speaking. It's getting involved. I went to vote yesterday for the school board, and usually there's no lines. Almost no one votes for that. It was incredible. People are waking up.
That's good news. And we encourage you, if you have votes and elections near you, I want you to be part of it. Thank you, John Graves, for being